So I think we're live here. I'm gonna pop out the chat here. Oh, come on. Grab the right place. And don't cover up any other. Well, let's leave that there. Okay. And I did have this, at least I did have this scheduled. We'll see what happens from here. I'll go through and I've still got a little bit of prep to do. I can probably bring up the things I was thinking. Okay. And heck, let's get on Facebook too, just to kind of see what's going on. I'm thinking of let's remove that pinning for that. Okay. And okay, I thought I went to see this main. Put that one on approval. Let's approve that. Okay, let's scroll down. Okay, that works out pretty good then. Get the refund. And I'm going to get back. Okay. To that. To that. So I might have a little bit of, okay, seeing one or two people come online. Um, still, I mean, I'll probably update that later on, though. There's no reason for me to do an update on that right now. Well, let's get back. Okay. So audio looks pretty good from OBS. I mean, somebody can tell me that's a better confirmation sometimes, but I think that that's pretty good. In fact, let's go with that up there. Okay. Yeah, that'll be fine. Get back over to the studio window here. I have some masking tape. This is an unboxing or maybe an unbagging. Still, do I like those? No. Let's bring that down. Okay. Yeah, whatever. There. I'm still so indecisive about about how I want my windows arranged and things like that. So I'll get this package without really going through and showing on screen before I mask some details. Okay. And I'm even masking the upper left. Yeah, mask out. Just to mask out the critical details. This tape doesn't really stick to. I should go through and get my knife too. One of my knives. I don't think I have a knife here. I think I know where I've got knives. I'll set that down. Wow, this tape's going to just peel off of some of these labels. That's fine though. Okay. So I need to go through and wow, just a simple chore is getting to be a little bit more elaborate. We will see. Both of those. Okay. We get back. Okay, I could have gone through. Wow. Not paying attention on my set as much as I need to. Because I could have could have. Okay. Let's get all this going. Okay. Okay. That's starting up. That means we probably need, well, who knows where the mouse is for that, but I know where the keyboard is. That's fine. That's good background. Yeah, I could have got that going and had that starting up. Nobody's chipped in on chat quite yet for um wow. I don't know if I like that yeah, that's fine. You get to see a little bit of my monitor off in the distance too for what we'll have up on screen. Let me go through on the OBS. I'm going to get off the webcam source, get just to the camcorder. And so this is the package that came in just yesterday. And so $5.15 for mailing it to me. We'll have to see what's inside. I really didn't know what to expect, but mailed out on September the 12th of 2023. So a little bit of background on this. Let's get back on. Let's actually get back on the webcam. Is that somebody's going through and selling. They had a few CPUs. I'm interested in kind of the other ones that were there. What exactly? If somebody went through and bought them or anything else, I'll probably ask some questions. But the other two were what is the Pentium 1? It was actually and I think they were 133 megahertz CPUs. The Intel S-spec, and we'll talk about that in a moment, of SY022. In other words, they're really good for a dual CPU system like the IBM PC server 320 or 520 that has the ability to do those socket 5 Pentiums up to 133 megahertz if you have the best boards for those systems and things like that. I've got a number of those CPUs. That's why I didn't go through and arrange a transaction for those CPUs as well. I thought just the one CPU that I spotted would be adequate enough, and it was it's an Intel 486 DX2 66 megahertz that I started doing a transaction for, and the so that CPU, and I have it in the thumbnail. I can probably go through and let's see if we can find a link to. We should get some pretty good. Okay, and this is probably even. Let's even do well, let's do this link first. This is what the CPU is. And from CPU World has the image and everything else. I don't know if I use that particular image for the thumbnail or not. Put the question mark over it or anything like that. And then there's a Vogon's thread. Okay, let's even go through and look. New tab. And even that one, a new tab. I want to see this. 35, $8 shipping. Okay. And this is from, okay, so that's a good comparable sale. No returns, but backed by eBay. Okay. So I'll put up my page first, my chart. So this is a chart I've done over a span of decades. I still need to do an update. Lists the 46 CPUs from Intel, specifically from Intel, since those are the originals that came out. And the reason I did is that the CPUs are not very well covered by the time of the 46 stuff. Intel was trying to mask a little bit of the design of the CPU, since they were having so many competitors that were trying to go through and also produce comparable or better CPUs that would challenge Intel in the marketplace. And there's probably more info out there now, and there's some data sheets and things like that. There's not much data really on the stepping, I don't think, which is my main interest there. And also pinning that to what Intel came out with was called an S-spec. And that was a matter of 5 characters. Typically, the first 2 characters were letters, and the last 3 were digits. And it didn't have any. The S-spec doesn't have any sequential formats or anything like that, or there's not, when you align as in the chart, it hops around from between the S-spec encoding for even comparable CPUs. Now, Intel did go through, and I explained the S-spec in that link that I just put up. And Intel sometimes did sequential ordering of one S-spec for a 50 megahertz CPU internally, the other one for a 66 megahertz internally, that were related. They were the same CPU steppings. So Intel linked them like that sometimes, but otherwise the S-spec is all over the board. As far as a lot of them are SX for the 2 letters, and then the 3 digits afterwards. The even that SX doesn't really have a part to play in the grand scheme of things of signifying what the CPU is, because most people can look at and say SX, they're talking about a 46 SX or a 386 SX. Well, no, not really. Now, the S-spec itself was on really limited form for the 386DX and 386. As far as I'm aware, on the 386 SX, I've never, well, maybe a code or two, an S-spec or two that I've seen on the 386 SX. A few 386DX CPUs are marked with the S-spec, although that there is more on the 386DX, there's a lot more encoding or Intel markings on the ceramic package of the 386DX to denote various things about the internals to that CPU, what uh, the die and things like that, the process that Intel used to make those chips, and um, that's not necessarily carried over. Well, it is to some extent that the ampersand e's and other encoding. In fact, I think the write back cache that we'll talk about, I think, is encoded in that. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the picture of in fact, do the same thing. I talked about it one time of being able to go through, and I don't have my monitor arranged, nor do for this background display. Let me see if I can find the mouse. Nice. So, okay. So disorganized there, but I think we've got to where we can pull. Okay, so we have mouse. Mouse is a little jumpy because we've got the USB sensor way over on the computer. Okay, we've got the keyboard flipped on. I'm going to use a little bit of my display here. I'll probably get off the webcam. I know that it's okay, let's go down the webcam just for a moment. I don't want to do any of the status. No, go away. I don't want to see no news or nothing like that, Microsoft. Boy, I'm just having... Okay, get it to where this thing can detect my mouse. Okay. The strange world, and then it launches it launches Edge. Okay. I'm just going to bring up another tab. And we're going to search for the same. Okay. This is it's bringing up just to go through. And I know that it's probably very hard to see on the camcorder as well. But this is the SX955 is the S-spec encoding of the CPU, and then it's got some encoding off down this ampersand EW5VIX, maybe, I don't know. I don't know what that encoding is, but it's got the S-spec encoding, the SX955 off to the side. Copyright date of 1989 and 1993, which will support the CPU ID instruction by those markings of the copyright date. It's a later 46 class CPU. And on my chart, like I said, I could have probably arranged a lot more of the material here a little bit better. My chart is on the okay. Let's just go through and minimize that. So at the Arden tool, I'm also going to do, to bring up that page, going through the search process. It's there at the Arden tool. And there is my page at the Arden tool as well. We're going to go through and we're going to scroll down to get to the section. I sure wish I had my monitor set up like I said I was going to do, and then I could go through and I could easily look off to the side. When I'd be here, I could easily look off to the side and see what it's going to display. Scroll down to the DX2 CPUs, and there is an entry in there, CPU ID of 0436 hex, and that's the initial or the reset, CPU reset code that comes off the CPU when it's first powered on, that the system can capture. And the interesting thing about these, this particular CPU of the DX2 CPUs is that the L1 cache is what they call a write-back mode. You can switch it over to a slightly faster, performance-wise way that the CPU runs the cache. So, and the CPU actually goes through and changes a CPU ID in that just to mark what mode that the L1 cache is set to on the chip at that moment. So the CPU can go through and shift from 0436 hex to 0470 hex. Depending if it's in the write back mode, it'll report that 0470. And so there were some later 46 systems that were able to run the cache in write back mode. So this was a different CPU. The performance was slightly above what other 46 DX2 CPUs from Intel was for that 66 megahertz speed. And Intel also had a version of this that was in the 50 megahertz speed internally, that the S-spec for that is SX954. And even on my chart, I have it mismarked a little bit, that one stepping is the 50 megahertz version is the AB0 or AC0 stepping, and I have the A stepping marked on the 66 megahertz version. I don't know if that's correct or not. I'll have to go through, because typically it'd been where Intel would have just stamped the CPU from the same relative batches. They would have gone through and tested them. A CPU that's not able to go 66 megahertz, they would just stamp as a 50 megahertz. So going through and doing a little bit of testing there. Now the S-spec, there are CPU batches that Intel did of those CPUs, and they still use the S-spec today. They've used it through the time from the 46 onward, and as a way of differentiating the batch encodings of all their different CPUs. And that would be where if they had a fault on that's reported for a particular S-spec, that they would know what batch to look at, and they could test comparable batches as well. The S-spec is just a batch encoding. There is even where other 46DX2 66 megahertz CPUs that were produced in different batches can have a different S-spec, even though that they're the same effective CPU, same CPU stepping, otherwise identically internally. But Intel broke it into batch numberings of the S-spec, and there are also CPUs that are they are the unique CPUs that have just that one S-spec, or they're the only CPUs that are like that, and this SX955 is one of those. Intel did not make any other 46DX2 CPUs of any other different S-spec. Just the SX954 for the 50 megahertz model, SX955 for the 66 megahertz model. So they're unique CPUs. Whenever I see them out there, it's time to pick those. I like to pick those up if they're in good condition, just to because they're slightly better than the regular. And I'll put another link up. In fact, I can probably do. I should have got the same search results, but it's a Vogon's link, and it's talking about, hey, is that is it SX955 is the best 46DX2 CPU? And there's a little bit of dialogue there. I don't look at. It doesn't look like I've participated on that discussion. Okay. I'll have to read through a little bit more of that. Now, also as well, there's an eBay auction that I pulled up with my search as well. This is marked as, for me, it's marked as $8 shipping. And for $35 USD. And the auction listing has it misidentified. They call it a socket 4, which is wrong. That's not a Pentium socket. But you encounter eBay sellers like that. So, and you can even get a 1-year protection plan from Allstate on this CPU. Of course, we get all the rare markings, the everything else to these CPUs. And I probably even have more of these CPUs tucked right in the drawer here. This auction says more than 10 available, 2 sold. at the price of $35 USD. I was trying to see where. Oh, and this is from Beijing, China. This um, a seller in China. Maybe buyer beware, or be there may not be necessarily anything wrong with it, but just for the handling of uh, a CPU or an IC chip like that, you want to be careful that's not remarked in any form, to where they've gone through and taking advantage of people searching for the S-spec SX955 a little bit more than a regular 46 DX2 CPU. And so they remarking the CPU just to try and sell it at a higher price. So let's go through. Okay, yeah, I've got the OBS up there. Let's get off the internal webcam again. So I spotted this. As I said, the seller had this, and I paid for the transaction on August the 25th. And there's some time elapsed. I should look at the timeline, because I think it's a matter of at least a couple weeks, 10 days maybe. Well, it'd have to be 10 days, because or maybe it could be as much as 2 weeks. Because today is actually the 21st day since I paid for this, since I paid for it on August the 25th. And, pardon me, just have to get a little bit of water in me, help my throat. So I prompted the seller 10 days, 2 weeks, I don't know, later, saying, I haven't got a tracking number. You haven't told me that you've shipped it or anything else. I've already paid. And I was prompted, hey, did you pay already? And yeah, they could have just looked back through the Facebook messaging system and seen that I paid them. They sent me an invoice to pay them from PayPal. And I wanted to go with buyer protection on this. Initially, the seller offered Venmo, and I don't know if they offered Cash App or anything like that. No buyer protection at all, which I realize why some sellers do that. We've got into that on previous videos, that PayPal goes through and holds that money after a transaction, and they do that for the reason that I'm going to get into, that if the buyer ultimately wants to be issued a refund if they don't get their item, that PayPal can do that. They've held on the money. They're not losing any money in that refund action. So I went with PayPal. And immediately after I answered yes, that that I'd paid for it, and I was seeing a lot of strange things through my phone, through the Facebook Messenger, to where only for this particular person, it was going to where they were listed as unavailable, that I couldn't actually reply. As soon as I said yes, then I couldn't do any further replies. Yes, that I'd paid. And the person started saying that they'd been hacked, the seller, that ultimately they thought I was the hacker, and didn't explain any logic to why they would have thought that way, or thought that what my incentive or motivation for doing that, because I'd sent $30 to them. They could verify that I've sent $30 to them easily enough. and had no other behavior that I was hacking them. Um, I believed it was almost just an excuse to get out of the transaction, just to go through and accuse me of hacking and pocket the $30. It would be up to me to deal with PayPal on a refund. And so I immediately started that process. I opened up with PayPal to try and get a refund, to tell them what the seller was engaged in, that they were just going through and delaying me after I'd paid, and accusing me of being a hacker, trying to scam them, and with the hopes that the refund could be spurred. And PayPal went through and just marked it as, and I never saw a human respond, but just marked on that, hey, we've given the seller until September 16th, which is today, to respond to a refund. Um, and I thought, well, I have to wait this out. I'm not going to get any further with this. I don't expect the seller to send me the package since they're accusing me of being a hacker. But I was able to eventually get through to them and say, hey, I'm not hacking you. I mean, just there's no incentive for me to do this. I don't understand. You may be being hacked, but I'm not the one doing that. I'm just seeing this as a delay. I told him it's a you problem. You say you're being hacked, that's a you problem. You've got my address and payment evidence right in front of you to send me the package. And even I had screenshots from there to say you're a liar, and calling me names to say that I was lying to them, that showing that they didn't do any transactions for the last 90 days on their PayPal account, and screen captures from what would have been another PayPal account. So they had more than one PayPal account, and I viewed it at that level that they were going through accepting payment on one PayPal account and then using the other one to go through and screen capture saying no transaction. We didn't receive any money from you. What are you talking about? And of course, the information at the top of that not being revealed as what PayPal account it was on or anything like that. And so it caused me a lot of concern that way. I just thought it's going to be more so that the transaction is going to turn out badly for me. They're going through and they're trying to conceal their tracks that I paid them or anything like that. And I was sending a screenshot of showing where I paid, and obviously was to a PayPal account. What I thought was interesting at one point in this arguing of whether I'd paid or not, he posted my address, my physical address that I've masked out here. And the only way that he would have been able to see that is through a completed PayPal transaction, that I paid money for the CPU. And I knew from there that he knew I'd paid. This just dog and pony show of going through. And I, of course, told him that, hey, well, I can go through on Facebook, and if you're trying to sell vintage computer items, well, we can end that pretty quickly. If I'm getting, others are going to experience the same behavior that I got from the seller, it would be anticipated. And so I finally got him to admit that, yes, I'd paid him. And, oh, I'm sorry for calling you a hacker, And even at that point, they said, well, I'll send the CPU. I'll send it for free. And I said, well, to be for free, that's got to be to where you give me a PayPal refund as well. Because you can say it's for free, but if PayPal's going to still send the payment through of $30, I paid for it. And the seller went through and said, I can't access that account. It's not something we that's the PayPal account that we don't typically access. And I thought at that point, yeah, they could even be legitimate. And ultimately, after I prompted, the seller agreed to send me the CPU. And as you see, postmarked here on September the 12th. And so, a number of days after and going through all this dog and pony show as far as whether I was a hacker or not to just get what I paid for. And I was worried that there'd be something else in here. And we'll have to see the condition. This is a bubble envelope. And years ago, when I was doing my chart, you see on the back page, I was getting a lot of 486, doing a lot of transactions for 486 class CPUs out there. Because I was going through and charting them, of course, charting the S-spec. I'd find the S-spec out there by a picture. I knew I didn't have it on the chart. And so I'd go through and do a transaction buy. And typically getting pretty good prices, although some of the rare S-specs I was having to go through and really chase around. But one came in a bubble envelope like this. And it was just a single layer on both sides of the bubble wrap on the inside of this. And the pins on the one side of the CPU had popped the bubble wrap. And then they were squashed flat by the USPS machinery in sorting the packages and things like that, and just the packages being jumbled together. And so I got a 486 CPU with some flat pins on it. And just was not packaged correctly for what it was. And I complained to the seller, and the seller responded to me. This is, of course, a different seller decades ago. It says, well, I marked on the package. They had fragile written on the package. The word fragile for a human to read and say, hey, that package is fragile. Nothing for the machinery or the method that they went through and packed that CPU. And I was not able to arrange any refund or anything else with the seller. They stuck to their guns that, hey, I marked it fragile. I did my due diligence. Who cares if it came to you flat? And I think I was able to salvage that CPU. The gold pins on these are pretty good as long as you're really careful, but it took me probably a matter of hours to straighten all the pins and to come up with a functional enough a CPU, because beyond the S-spec of seeing the S-spec and seeing the information I'm writing down the chart, I'm also testing that for what CPU ID or the CPU reset signature that's being reported. So I'm going through it, and I have to have a functional CPU to do that. I did discover in my testing, I went through and yes, I had non-functional CPUs as well. And I went through and marked those and set them off the side. They would be maybe good for pictures or something else like that, but internally they did not function. So we're going to see what this looks like on the inside. And we've been going, I haven't seen any, I'll have to look at, see if there's any follow-up comments. I'm seeing more people join into the stream. Thank you for attending. And I'm not seeing any further chat messages or anything like that. YouTube, I've heard about this invalid traffic bug. I'm not big enough. I'm not monetized anyway on my channel to be affected that way. But something more just seems up on YouTube that I'm not getting I don't think the views or the algorithm, and I understand I haven't done videos, a bunch of videos or anything like that recently in the last year or anything like that. But the I just view it as I'm getting less. My channel's getting less traffic than what I think I would normally be getting, especially for listing this live stream. I don't know if people are getting the notifications. That knife is it's pretty dull. Pretty dull. I need to get out my other. Well, and it's probably good that this plastic material too. It's a little stretchy and provides that tear protection, I guess. So and so that's the one thing too. The seller was going through, and I can mask off this, but this was the original envelope that the seller was taunting me with, saying, and he was trying to show they'd marked down his address in the upper right, upper left-hand corner, and that he was effectively awaiting my address, and he was still trying to taunt me. That's why I thought it wouldn't turn out so well otherwise. This is the original envelope that he was including pictures of and things like that. And when I got a package that was a different color, I thought, that's a little strange. So this is the internal envelope. I'm still doing my due diligence. I'm going through and hiding his address. I'm not going through and expecting to have repercussions on him or anything like that. And so this is bagged up pretty good. This is I didn't know if I was going to get pubic hairs mailed to me or what exactly, for the CPU. This is why I'm doing this on video. Okay. So here's the CPU. The pins are kind of stuck in that packaging. You can see indentations and tears and things like that. It's not a real good way. And this looks like for the markings of the CPU that I arranged the transaction for. And it's even interesting. I don't know if it's yellow compound. I probably shouldn't be scraping away, trying to uh, guess, what this material is. I'm taking that as older heatsink. IBM used to do almost like the same material. They had their bronze looking heat sinks that they do. And they do an X on the CPU, and that's how they would glue the heat sink to the CPU. It wasn't a liquid thermal compound, or it's actually solidified and glued the CPU to the heat sink. You could typically slip a flat bladed item in there and pry the heat sink off. But you'd typically be left with this X on the top. And of course, that would hide any of the S-spec or any other marking to the chip. And there was a few Intel CPUs that I've got on my chart in the background, link provided earlier, of course, that are without the S-spec. And it was the ones that IBM had gone through and put an FRU encoding. And FRU is the replacement or the ordering number or the identifier that IBM had to what a particular CPU was as well. But there are Intel CPUs that are rebranded, remarked as it were, didn't have the fancy white paint logo and things like that. That, I could even show pictures of those online for they're remarked by IBM. Just IBM was given the raw materials from Intel, and they went through and marked them their own way. I'm thinking that that's heatsink material, but I don't know. I don't know if this came out of an IBM system, but at least all the S-spec and everything else matches up good, and is pretty clear. Now for the Chinese remarking these CPUs, this white paint, and that's nothing for them to go through and reproduce. You can sometimes take isopropyl alcohol over stuff like this, and if it washes away, it can be remarked. Nail polish or acetone, I think, is what some people use as well. The black lettering is actually more of a stamp. It's a little bit deeper. So going through there and, wow, what's the focus here? With the lighting, I'm just getting it the lettering washing out and everything. So the so that may be a little bit more evident that had been changed. As I said, that ampersand EW, I think the W is going through and there's a little bit of encoding for the write back. And then you've got other encoding. You've got that L4520532 markings that Intel had that I don't know the decoding from that. But ultimately, the ampersand EW5VIX or something else, that's the encoding of what die and things that Intel has done. We're going to look at the back. We're going to look at the pin conditions. Now, I had marked on my chart that the ones that I'd seen previously, it had the I66 for Intel 66 megahertz marked on the underside. This just has the copyright date, does not have any other, made in Malaysia. Oh, okay, I see the I66 is something to the heat spreader. And these have the heat spreader on the underside, with the Intel, with the later Pentiums, they did have the socket 4 CPUs that had a heat spreader on top. Some of the later CPUs had that heat spreader. And then, of course, Intel went through and changed the fab, but it's got that I66 stamped in the heat spreader on the bottom. This is the heat spreader is soldered in on the bottom of these, and it's easy to go through and do what's called a delidding, that you pull those off, of course, with a heat gun or propane torch or whatever. And you would do that for a non-functional CPU, of course. You wouldn't, unless you're trying to take your functional CPU off the market. A delidding can be done on should be done on a non-functional CPU. You have the pin 1 markings and things like that, even from that. Typically, the square pin also denotes the pad is to where that's marking the pin 1 orientation, as well as that chopped off corner. Different from, well, the other ones are kind of squared. There's a dot on that corner on this side. But yeah, normally the square pad and everything else. We're going to look over the conditions of the pins to this especially. And generally what you can do is you can look at these edge on to see how squared the pins are. And this one, there's a few pins that look just slightly angled. There's a few, like back here in this back section, that look a little bit more off. You also see the discolorization on this pin here. I've seen that with the, and this is ultimately a thin plating of gold. Um, the metal scrappers think that these pins are entirely composed of gold and things like that. Well, and that the CPU can be that they can get that much gold off of these things. Well, they're a little bit mistaken for that. It's just it's ultimately a little bit of a plating level. The pins themselves are not, or you'd see any CPU out there if that was entirely gold, or even that heat spreader plate was gold, you would see um, the CPUs smashed up a lot more and used for gold recycling, just about everything, because the value of the gold in them would be much higher than what it actually is. So I'll probably go through and I can scrub up that, clean up that one pin. I have contact cleaner and things like that, and brushes and things like that. And I can straighten any other pins to this. That one pin at the corner, as it typically is a little bit more bent. That's what happens on these, is the edge pins, since they take more of the force, kind of the side force, and probably that whole row is, you can see that they're all off in alignment a little bit. But I have tools I can go through, and I can put those in better parallel. But yeah, that, and particularly that one edge, just in the way it was packed or handled before, is a little squashed. I was seeing one of these that was just really, one of the pins that looked really off, but I'm not spotting it now. But that is what looks to be a CPU that, and I mean, I don't think that this thing was tested or anything of that nature the way he had it, the way it was presented. I'll have to go through and do some testing on it just to make sure that it is a functional CPU. Because I mean, otherwise, I've got pictures pictures are out there on the internet. I don't need to take a picture of these. I don't need. I've got CPUs if I want to delid them. This might be interesting for that write back L1 cache to see how different the die looks, but I just don't have the tools to go through and to show that die up close for what it is. Okay, and Retrotech Chris has entered the chat. So I'm gonna get switched back on, get the internal webcam on here. Try and get a little bit to where I don't have that double imaging or anything else like that, where people see me move around and in unsynchronized fashion from one camera view to another one. But so that's really the transaction all wrapped up. I mean, it took an hour to get there, to kind of explain some of the different things of why I was interested in that CPU in the first place, and arrange a transaction that just really, I had thought for days that it had gone south. And until me going through and opening this and finding a real live a CPU that I had ordered, I didn't know what to expect from the seller. Now, I think the seller realized I could go through and I could damage that reputation of the seller. I think he has other items to sell that he wants to sell in groups. I've gone through for the one group that he was on. I've gone through and I've suspended him on that group just for what I encountered, and I didn't want other people to be scammed in a lot of the same way that I was. Whether I have to reconsider that now, that's left up to the viewer, maybe, because we could say that I truly did get a CPU for free, even shipped to me free. So I got the refund of $30. I have that PayPal doing the verification of that today when I just checked prior to going live. That the seller is also out that $5.15 to ship that, to package it up and ship it. They're out of the time that they went through to package it up. And so it's truly a free CPU on my part and costing the seller, and he doesn't have that CPU to sell elsewhere, to offer for sale. Is otherwise out more than the $35. So you could view it as, yeah, the transaction completed, likely to my satisfaction. I understood that I was getting the CPU in untested, and I'm fine with that. We'll just find out if it works or whatever. I don't think the seller would have gone through and tested it and deliberately withheld that that it was found to be broken or anything like that. But these are the kind of things that you have to take into mind when you do these transactions. And normally, the fact is, a lot of time on the people I run a transaction with, and I try and go through and establish a very human face to the transaction of going through and communicating everything that I need to say to show that I'm a human, that I'm interested in the transaction, and doing my part in a good faith effort to the seller. But I usually tell the seller, no rush. It doesn't really matter to me that whether I get something immediately. As long as I do a transaction and I've got it in, fine. I'm not hinging on waiting for that part to arrive a lot of the time. And fact is, I've gotten packages that from friends and other people, other sellers, that I've not gone through and opened. Now, a transaction like this, where I don't know the person, typically I'm going through and opening the package, sometimes in this case on video, going through masking out addresses on both sides, even for someone that I consider has gone through some steps of being argumentative or not going through and completing the transaction the way I want it. I've had sellers that have gone through and gone to ship an item, and I've paid the agreed upon price and everything, and then later told me, well, the shipping costs were higher than what I told you, and expecting me to pay more for shipping and things like that. A lot of time I'm going to go through and I'm going to open items from people I don't know on video, just to see with the payment protection of whether I need to open up a claim as buyer protection because of having the wrong item or damaged item or something else sent. And we've seen in prior unboxings, I've received damaged items before. The seller taking pictures of a perfectly functional item in auction and shipping me a broken device that is non-functional. And for the transaction I had a number of months ago on that, I went through and I've got a refund, and that was through eBay, but I got a refund of half the item's value, half of what I paid for the parts that were still broken, and I have to see what I can do to repair something like that if I wanted to put that back into service. So, as the transaction goes, I mean, the seller ended up taking a loss to get me the item, Do I go through and do I work with that to let them back on the group without going through and warning others to say, hey, yeah, in the end, this transaction completed. I would hope that he would be better for shipping things out quicker, not accusing people of hacking him that are buying stuff, realizing, critically thinking about something to realize that I'm just not the one that's hacking him. There's not any incentive or motivation for me to do that. And I mean, in the end of that looking like he's trying to get out of that, doing that transaction, that he's at worst case trying to scam people, bait and switch, allure them in, getting them to pay money, and then going through, even if they have buyer protection, of trying to induce delays. And that's what these sellers do, is they try and induce delays, get to where your buyer protection doesn't cover you, and by the time you receive or don't receive something, that's why for the 10-day or 2-week wait that I was doing, that I did not have any further communication that the seller had sent anything out. I was concerned because I just thought, hey, they go through and they block me a messenger and they just leave it up to me to go through and get the refund from PayPal or whatever, if I can do that. Who knows what they'd tell PayPal on an occasion like that, to where, it'd say, hey, we shipped it, and the guy's lying to you. He's, and to where they could go through and come up with evidence of shipping a package. I'm aware sellers could get the same thing, to where I could say, not opening on this on video, going through and saying, yeah, the seller sent me a package, but it didn't have the item in it. They didn't do their end of the view. But in the end, I was made whole. I got the money back. The seller shipped me the item at a loss to himself. I'll probably take those factors into account, but probably with a warning to other people that if they happen to deal with him, to make sure that he does not go through and treat other people like he went through and treated me. That they can, have an item shipped to them quicker or whatever else. But I hope the content of the video and how I went through and did the lead in and everything else, of not just going right to the unboxing, but showing a little bit of the behind the scenes of why I'm interested in particular CPUs. And I do have that chart up. It's available at the Ardent tool. You just search for Intel 46 and you'll easily find it, or S-spec, something of that nature. Now that chart is out there on the internet. It sometimes I'm not even credited for making it. I've seen sites that have gone through and copied the information I'm providing, and clearly copied the information, the empirical evidence that I've gained over that of buying many CPUs, 46 class CPUs, and testing them, taking that time, that they just go through and they put up the information without giving me credit. And, maybe at some form that's fine too, but I sure wish I'd get credit for something I've done. You can view the $30 refund and the $5 that were paid by the seller to ship the item to me at their cost. That's maybe payment a little bit of my time back for having to go through and deal and spending hours and having to do screen captures and things like that, of showing that, having to open a claim on PayPal. Yeah, that, maybe that makes me come out a little bit more even, to where, as payment for my time of having to deal with a dog and pony show from a seller on that. But really, in the end, no hard feelings to the guy. I mean, I got the item. I can work with what I was sent. I don't care, I care to a level that whether it's functional or not, but I know that he not tested it. I'm willing to take it at that face value. And I just want people to treat me at that face value a little bit more, to where they understand I'm a real person, and especially in a group. And I've had other scammers on groups that I've moderated. They go through and they seemingly want to taunt me and others that they're scamming them. That the CPUs that I'm interested in. Okay. Now, as I said, I know that my chart's a little bit out of date. The question is from Jimbo in the chat, and I'll go through and address that quickly as it popped up. So I know that I have to update the chart a little bit. Throughout time, I've gone through. If I've seen an S-spec online, I've gone through and I've grabbed an image of it, and I've tried to save that away as a note to remind myself that yes, I needed to add it to the chart. I do have some CPUs listed on there, some S-specs I'm able to determine that I do not know the CPU reset signature or the CPU ID. The CPU ID is the critical thing because beyond the copyright date, it lets me know of what level that CPU is at. And Intel started doing the CPU reset signature even from the 386 class CPUs before even it split into the 386DX and 386SX. But you have to have a BIOS, IBM or in some cases for the 46 level, Phoenix BIOS. Your AMI and Award BIOS is Mr. BIOS. Do not do it. Of the ones I found, and this is not trying to plug my the items or the brand I go with, but has been IBM that has the BIOS that through their dealings, their interactions with Intel, that they quickly had a BIOSes that were able to save away that CPU reset signature. Now, I have information on pages on an IBM system of how to get that CPU reset signature. I can go through and I can add links in. The long answer to the very short question of what CPUs I'm interested in, if it's not on my chart, I'm interested in figuring out what the CPU ID of that processor is. And I've also got to come a little bit more full circle that the CPUs that I've gone through and purchased and I empirically tested, I've got a little bit of a surplus of those. In fact, I don't know why I was even buying the CPU for this transaction if I've got others that I may have that I haven't even put in service that are a comparable rating. And I'm just trying to do it for people out there. I tried to fill a gap of there wasn't much information on the 46 CPUs, and I wanted to give a relatively a level to someone could see an S-spec on CPU and instantly know, or by referencing the chart, they could know what level that CPU was, and there could be obliteration of any other markings on that CPU. But as long as they knew the S-spec, they would know what that CPU is, what effective batch it was from, or for all that, all the other details to that CPU, and especially if it had features on that, like the cache being able to be put in right back versus right through. They would go a little bit further, but I'm going to give the link to the ways to go through and to get that CPU reset signature, because I like going through and encouraging people and providing the information of how they can also do things, of how they can, where I gain the information. I'll first give a link to this on the right. Okay. So here's a page that I have on the and that should be clickable despite YouTube going through and highlighting my account name there, but that's the page that shows how that information is gained of the CPU reset signature, even prior to the CPU ID function being available, and also the table at the bottom showing where the different IBM models that have a 386 CPU or higher store that information on the system, because as the computer is powered on, that CPU does a reset of itself as it wakes up. And in that brief instance, it actually goes through and throws a value onto its registers of what it is. That is the CPU reset signature. And it's up to the system BIOS to quickly capture that value. That's typically what the first thing that the BIOS of the system would do in this case, or these IBM BIOSes in particular, is they grab that CPU reset signature from the CPU in that condition, and they store it away in a defined area, because that CPU is going, as it starts up, it's going to overwrite that value as it goes through and gets quicker. It's not going to save that CPU reset signature away itself. And in the case of like this write back CPU, that the reset signature initially, when the system is powered on, is that 0436, because it boots up in a standard condition with the L1 cache in the write through mode. And then it goes through, and if the system BIOS supports it, it puts the L1 cache in write back mode, if that is the setting on the system. And then a different CPU ID is reported for this CPU, since it's made, the copyright date of being also in 1993, of that copyright being revised, basically, or the die being revised, as Intel went through and did that. And so it supports the CPU ID function. My page also talks a lot about what CPUs give the CPU ID and which don't, which are too old of CPUs to give the CPU ID, but they all do a CPU reset signature. And so if it's not in my chart, I'm interested in testing for it. I'm interested in, and this, the link that I'm providing to my chart is even, that's what Major Tom has put out there on the Ardent Tool site. He's actually gone through and organized my page a little bit better. I do have a page for this on my own site that Major Tom goes through and mimics at the Ardent Tool and tries to keep up to date. When I would have any changes on that chart, I would tell him, hey, yeah, you need to grab a new copy or add these entries. I would love to go through, and I need to go through and look at the chart a lot more and add the entries I intend to. Any CPU that an S-spec that you find out there of a 46 class CPU that I don't have listed, that would be great for that to be tested, either me or someone else, to go through and to test that, because I want to have as complete of information as I can out there for people. And now the interesting thing for the places like CPU World, that page that I linked earlier, at CPU World with the picture of this CPU before I opened the package, that a lot of the time they list the CPU ID there. And the amusing thing to me is that that is relatively incomplete information, because that is truly the CPU reset signature of the 0436X. That CPU can have a different CPU ID if the cache is in, if the L1 cache on the CPU is in the write back mode. It'll have 0470 hex. So pages like that are very good in describing the parameters for the CPU, but they still do not reveal the detail that I have, that stepping can change, or that CPU ID can change for the CPU in question. And that CPU reset signature is pretty critical in some aspect. I mean, IBM has what is called the Silvercap CPUs, the 386 DX CPUs that were used in the Model 70, Model 80 PS2s. And this is at a point in time where Intel was having a hard time keeping up with the production levels of the 386 DX CPUs, that there were, manufacturers were having those delayed from receiving those. And so the Silvercap CPUs in the IBM PS2s, the PS2 Model 70, Model 80, I want to go through and to test those, because I was interested in seeing what the CPU reset signature would be. And it shows that's an Intel CPU reset signature. So it looks like Intel was just providing the dies, the ultimately the electronics inside, and IBM was coming up with the packaging around the chip. So I need to pull out those silver cap 386 CPUs. Those, and I can probably even do a video on those sometimes, because there's enough material out there and people have gone through and tested them past what I started, and have information on them. But that was a very revealing detail by the CPU reset signature. So that does reveal of the origins of the internals to those CPUs, whether it was Intel or otherwise. IBM was going through, the first hint was IBM was marking the packaging of those CPUs additionally with a copyright date from Intel as well. They're marking a copyright date for them as IBM and a copyright date for Intel. So those have a dual copyright date on them on the package to comply with copyright law and things like that. Otherwise, Intel being credited that ultimately that is their intellectual property that is on that 386 silver cap chip that's in an IBM PS2. Does not look like a regular Intel 386DX. And we have to remember that intellectual property thing, that was a discussion that went on for decades between Intel and its competitors, that whether the competitors were unfairly copying the Intel products to produce their own, or whether they were properly going through and reverse engineering those. So that's maybe a discussion for another day, another video. But just to go through and provide the long answer to the question of what CPUs I'm interested in, that anything that's on the chart, let's get it charted. Let's get a little bit more details on it. So I do thank everybody for tuning in. This was a very I think this is a very informative video. Maybe took a little bit of time to get started. I did go through and I did schedule it. I'm trying to go through and do enough scheduling in advance to tell people when I'm going on for these live streams. Typically, I'm trying to hold to the same time frame every Saturday. I think it's a good time frame that can do these, and trying to come up with enough content. I've got a lot of other factors going on. And so it is sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to go through and to have a live stream, but I'm going to go through and do what I can. So that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you. Thanks everybody for tuning in.